Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is Mark Molina, CEO, Molina Leadership and Business Development Solutions. I'm very grateful and thankful to have with us this afternoon City Councilor from Springfield of Ward 1, the Gateway area, Sean VanGordon. I appreciate his making his time, giving us some time to have some conversations with him. We can get to know him a little bit better. As a community, we get a chance to hear some of his story. And I'm going to begin by reading some of his bio. It's significant, so I'm going to just pick a few pieces off of it, and we'll let Sean tell the rest of the story. So Sean was born in Anaheim, California, and he has one brother, Ian. They moved to Roseburg when he was 14. His wife's name is Elaine, and they have twin girls, Katie and Livy, right? He moved to Springfield in 2007, and he has been working here since college, loading packaging cars at UPS. Very good. Now, I'm trying to learn to use my phone for all of these, to print less paper. So let me just go to the top of this email to pull your bio back up. I notice you have a really significant education, Sean. You're very with your engineering background, your economics background, your logistics background. It's very incredible. I can see how that would be a great tool and service to the city regarding budgetary, and not just the budget, but just all the logistics that go into the planning of every area that city management is concerned with. You have a Master's of Science Economics, 2002, University of Oregon. You have a Bachelor's of Science in Economics and Political Science, also from the University of Oregon, 2001. You have a series of awards and a series of significant leadership positions in the community. You are the city councilor, duly elected city councilor, Gateway area, Ward 1. You were city council president from 2017 to 2018. City of Springfield Representative, Lane County Poverty and Homelessness Board, 2016 to present. City Council Liaison, Springfield Library Advisory Board, 2015 to present. City of Springfield Representative to Catholic Community Services of Lane County G Street Oasis for Homeless Youth Steering Committee, 2015 to present. Budget Committee, 2011 to present. City of Springfield Representative LCOG, for those that don't know what LCOG is, that stands for Lane Council of Governments, Metropolitan Area, 2015 to 2016. Joint Elected Official Ambulance Service Task Force, Joint Elected Official Ambulance Service Task Force, 2011 to 2013. Finance and Judicial Committee, 2011 to 2012. Planning Commission, 2008 to 2011, and the Historic Commission, 2008. Springfield Economic Development Agency, 2011 to present. Chair, 2016 to present. Vice Chair, 2014 to 2016. And you have just a list of many other significant leadership accomplishments. And so thank you. And my first question I like to ask people when they give me an opportunity to meet them, tell me one thing about you that is not on this very impressive bio.
Oh, geez. Well, one thing that's not really known well to me is like I've grown up in California. So till I was the age of 14, we lived in Orange County, which I thought was small town America, and then we moved to Roseburg. And so it was pretty exciting. That was a pretty exciting move. Giant science fiction fan. I love playing board games. That's not talked about a whole lot. You know, every once in a while, I hope the library would invite me down to, play board games with the teens, but they haven't done that yet.
Yeah, you might be surprised. Some of those young folks might be a handful for you. So, for those that are watching, in the interest of full disclosure, this conversation will not be about Mayor Lundberg or her family matters. This conversation is about Councilor VanGordon and his experience on the council, the things he's learned. I have not given him any advanced questions. This is just going to be a one-on-one, so people get a chance to know him better, and I really appreciate this. And I'd like to begin by saying to you something you probably don't know about me is I have an identical twin brother. I'm an identical twin. And in my graduating class in high school, 1982, we had three sets of identical twins and two sets of fraternal twins. So it was a unique experience for sure.
So
Now,
you twin life is very interesting. Does your mom ever talk about other twin parents stopping them when they were younger? Like when my twins were younger, people would stop my wife and just come up and hug her and say, "It will be okay. Twins are amazing."
yeah, my mom was in a twins group. My mom died fairly young. She was 40. I was 10. Her and my aunt drowned in flash flooding in Texas, but she was part of a twins club. So a lot of moms who had twins, lots of photos, and we were the youngest. I'm the youngest of seven. My twin brother, I think he was 7 minutes older than me, or is 7 minutes older than me. So I think she had the help of our older siblings to help manage all of that, or it could have been tough.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Sean, tell us about your journey into city politics. You graduated with some impressive degrees, which means you have a highly analytical, detailed mind, which is very prone to intense critical thinking. When did you realize that this was something you wanted to do long term? When did you start serving in city boards and why?
So I started serving. The first board I served on was the Historic Commission. So that was like maybe '08 when we first got over here. Like I said, I've been working in Springfield for a long time, and so like the sort of adventure up until this point had really been like my grandmother taught social studies, right? Like so politics was always something that we learned about and talked about sort of growing up. And in '08 I actually had run against Terry Byer, who was the representative at that time. You're 20, I'm 28, right? Like I like pounding in yard signs and and sort of just talking about issues. And the thing I learned from that is really like governance is a really complex set of committees and structures, and how do you keep the community going. And my learning moment from that was really I needed to get on board and commission, and I really got on the historic commission from there, and then learned about planning commission from there, and just like most people just kind of fell in love with the process.
So in 2008, you ran for state representative against Terry Byer.
Yep.
I think I remember that now. I think I remember recognizing your name in that process. And it's funny how formative years, excuse me, really shape and mold us for what we are today. Because it was our mother that would, I remember during, for instance, Watergate, and she would tell us, she'd make us sit down and watch it. And she would say, this is, you're Americans and this is your country and that's your president and you have to know what's going on. And she was such a great storyteller, excuse me, that I like you, I loved history, I loved social studies, all of those things. And so it's great to see that impacted you in such a way that here you are in this season of your life, and it's allowing you to serve people as an elected official. Now, what did you learn about yourself other than you needed to get more informed in your 2008 campaign for state representative?
Well, I think you learn a ton anytime that you kind of raise your hands, right? That democracy is, a choice, right? So, like, it really helped. Like, I learned everything from, um, you know, my wife had always said, "Hey, make sure you wash your hands." This was back when you could knock doors, right? And I had never been sicker in my entire life. And then she was like, "I told you." All the way through, like I just needed to figure out and grow and think better as a leader, because at that point, I was thinking from that analytical side of my brain about how, just straightforward all of this sort of seemed to me. And in reality, leadership is a lot more nuanced than that, to try to get entire communities to see a vision and work towards a vision and work together on that. And it's like, it really probably the last, I don't know, 10, maybe 12 years really got me thinking about how to think more strategically opposed to sort of more tactically about all the details that I could see in the entire world.
Now, most engineers that I know, most people that I know with your type of education, they're introverts. They don't like people. They like to be locked down doing analytical work. They like digesting a lot of information. And you appear to be very engaging with people. You have good communication skills. When did you realize that that was just as much a part of you and that was necessary to do what you wanted to do as well as manage your intellect?
Um, I think I so if you back up the story a little bit from 2008, right? Like really, I led my first crew at UPS in 2000, probably 2002, right? So I had been really going through this sense of how do you manage, how do you lead from there. And I remember between that period and probably that 2007, 2008 area, that like just learning that you got to go talk to people, right? Like in watching leaders that had come before me and understanding that everybody has their strengths and their weaknesses. And really, and this isn't a question about politics, this is a question of leadership,
Right.
but just being observational enough to go, what do people do that I like? Like, what do that I find inspiring, that I find that I can include in my own skill set? And then what do people do that maybe I don't like, and how do I grow it? Like, how do I grow as an individual? So like the idea of what you see is me focus on being sort of conversational and out there and being more outgoing is a product of both two things. One of them is being a leader in this community, right? You've got to go talk to people. You've got to meet people where they're at and talk about their entire issues. And then on the business side, right, like, being able, having a full-time job on the side of that, just learning that if you're going to lead a work group that's got 40 people in it, they really need to see you. And in 2020, right, we're inspired by like leaders that have an authentic feel to them
Mm-hmm.
and can talk to people with where they're at and kind of connect at a human level to folks. So it's taken a lot of focus and a lot of practice, and sometimes I'm good at it, and sometimes I go, oh, okay, that didn't work.
I had the privilege of serving in the U.S. military from 1983 to 1995, and I had the chance to meet people from all over the world and different religions and races and backgrounds and socioeconomic upbringing. And you really have to learn when you're in the military to get comfortable quickly. And then when you're a leader in the military, there are there's no conversations about would you like to do this. The conversation is this is what you are going to do. At 24, I was signed for over $1 million worth of equipment at the age of 24 that I had to maintain at all times. Talk about stress. But I learned that I could do it. And so I just think the value of what you're discussing right now, what you're sharing, leading a crew at UPS, learning to what do I like about this style, what do I dislike about this style, how can I adapt it to what I would like to become to make me more effective. It has to be intentional and it has to be deliberate. And it looks like you've really done some of that hard work.
Well, and even from a when you learn and talk to from a multicultural perspective, right? It's being okay with sort of taking risks and sort of jumping into things, understanding that maybe it's going to feel a little uncomfortable and maybe it's not going to work out. But like learning as a person and learning as a leader really happens in that uncomfortable space. I'll give you an easy one that the first time I got a part of my work group in India, right? Like we ran into like just a language choice problem. And I don't mean that everybody's English was perfect, but like when you talk in India, one of the things that when they say questions, they said, I have doubts, right? And, it kind of threw us a little bit because in the US, if I had said, I have doubts to you, that could be much more, like questioning your integrity, right? And like, until you're in those moments and you go, oh, okay, right, this is what you're talking about, this is what I'm talking about, and how do we connect the two? That always helps.
Yeah, it's funny how when I joined the Army and I was in basic training and there was guys that were from Cuba, Puerto Rico, Dominican Republic, from Mexico, I'm from the small town in Texas. I was, I thought everyone that looked like me ate tortillas and chorizo and beans. And I found out that wasn't true and that words were different. And one morning I'm in chow and they said, "Would you like some grits?" Well, I thought it looked like cream of wheat to me. So I got my grits and I sit down. You got 2 minutes to eat, so real fast I'm pouring sugar and milk on my grits. And these young African American soldiers my age from the South were like, "What are you doing, man? Those are grits. You're supposed to put butter and pepper." I didn't know, and it tasted a whole lot better their way than their description of how to properly eat them than the way I was trying to eat them. But there's just something to be said about being exposed to different peoples and different groups that expands our horizon. Now, what did you learn about Springfield, the people of Springfield, the residents of Springfield, the maybe some of the wants and the struggles of Springfield? And let's go back to when you ran for a state representative. How did that begin to help mold you and shape you for what would come next?
I don't think it's that point that really I started to learn and fall in love with the town. I think it was unloading boxes when I was in college. The reality is, you walk around this town and you ask, like, we're secretly good at things, right? When people tell their story all the time. I moved here from Texas, or I moved here from Eugene, and man, I love it. And it's nothing like I expected. And they kind of smile and they shake their head and they go, "Man, there's something about this town."
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Right.
Sometimes it's small, sometimes it's got a neighborhood, sometimes it's economic activity, but people always get that little bit of a smile and go, "Man, there's something about this place, in our sort of heart," right?
Mm-hmm.
About why this town's so important to us. And I think when you look at its story, right? Like when I was on Historic Commission, I really saw how innovative the town is, right? All the way through the wood products days, and how sort of naturally practical everybody is, right? And the feeling in the community value of, hey, you got to just work it out, right? And figure out how to go forward as a community. I mean, those are all like aha moments that you learn about, like, what does this community really want and really need and really want to be, right? Like, and probably in the last 20 years, we've really grown into a place that is, not is distinct, not in its relationship to Eugene, but distinct on its own merits. And I think that's been the story so far, right? Like, instead of comparing ourselves being like not Eugene, Springfield's a place that's, in particular, it's its own special place.
Now, what is I don't remember from the bio, so forgive me. But now, is your wife from here?
My wife's from Roseburg. We were actually debate partners in high school. So her family lives 10 minutes away from where my family lives in Roseburg.
What are her thoughts about her new life with you here in Springfield?
She loves the town. She loves eating downtown. Like, eating from La Granada is one of her favorite things to do. So, we've been married since '03. So we, went through the whole leaving college to your first apartments over here to buying a house. Like, she loves it over here too. So.
That's really good. All right, you get on the planning commission, you're on the historic commission. When did you accept this internal motivation? Okay, I'm running for city council and I'm doing it now.
So leadership, like especially civic leadership's about right time, right place a little bit, right? So, you don't really have this moment where you go, aha, right? You kind of have, just based on, how terms run, how people are serving, those kind of things, you have opportunities happen, right? So I didn't really have that question about whether or not that I wanted to be on city council until essentially Mayor Lycan at the time went to become a county commissioner, and then Mayor Lundberg became Mayor Lundberg, and then it had opened up an opportunity, and then I had applied at that point. So really, if you actually look at the story of most city councilors, like probably 75% of them follow that sort of boards and commissions, they bounce around there for a while, and then there's some opportunity either that comes up to run for city council, and then they go, okay, I can do this too. So that's kind of how that happened. And then I applied, and then the council chose me and appointed me in 2011.
Okay, and so you filled out how much term in that appointment?
2 years, right? So like council works the same way as
Okay.
mayor. So you fill out, if you get appointed, you have to stand at the next regularly scheduled biennial election.
Now, in your election for, post appointment, now you're running to win the seat outright in a general election. In what ways had you changed? And with the knowledge you acquired through your service, the knowledge of the people, because this is on the other side of the housing economic crash. This is you're in, and you're on the council that's trying to lead a city through what was. I was on the budget committee during the housing crash, so it was tough stuff. How did it prepare you or change you?
So I think it got me to start to think about, like, no matter what, you're playing a little bit of a long game with city politics in the community, right? You're thinking in 5-year increments, right? You're thinking in 10-year increments, right? So in that you have to make, you're making choices based on what your best impression of where the community is. I remember that first year sitting on budget committee, and so we had a list of stuff we had to sort of figure out, like, how are we going to keep community service officers on the street, right? And we had to kind of move some things around from a project perspective, or how are we going to fill some police officers that we had and make some actual really tough decisions to make sure that the city came running. But like in those moments, like you really have to look up and at the horizon and go, okay, am I pointing the city in the right direction for the entire community? And just keep marching forward, right? Like sometimes it's not pretty, sometimes it's not easy, but like you got to keep going forward.
When you ran for the council in 2011,
It would have been 2000.
13,
Yeah, probably 2014.
2014. Were you aware of a more narrow focus of how you wanted to be a representative of Ward 1 and how you wanted to have an impact in the city?
In Springfield, we elect by the whole region and the whole area, right? So like one of those early things that I found myself is kind of thinking about having to explain to everybody the whole story of the entire city, the city, and about what we needed to do. So like, and those are the early days that we're trying to figure out how to get downtown going, right? You see the sort of crime rate dropping from starting to jail. And now you're starting to see Planktown start to show up in some of those early pieces. So like in those early spots, I've really had to play with how do I actually tell that story to constituents so that, in some cases they see progress, right? When Planktown opens, that's actually noticeable, tangible progress that you can put your hands on. But really they need me to be a storyteller in that place and, understand that same corner that Planktown's on, the crime rates dropped in that corner, like 90% since, the police station opened, so, right, like to put things in context and make sure that they also, that, voters, those are the people I ultimately serve, understand how we're making progress, but also like, what's the stuff that's behind the scenes that you don't really know, right? Like, what you're doing with sewers and what you're doing with sometimes roads and, helping people see that the city's really in good hands and giving them the space to live their everyday life.
Yeah, it's very different. I was singing with the group called the Springfield Jazz Singers, and we practiced, rehearsed in the Emerald Arts Center. And I remember every night when we would, or the nights of rehearsal, I'd come out and be walking to my vehicle. The prostitutes would always be out there, and the people selling drugs, and inevitably I would always giggle. I'd go home and tell my wife that, hey, one of the girls again asked me if I was looking for a date, walking to my car. And so I remember how difficult it was downtown and how challenging it was to be safe. And now we have a brand new downtown as everything is coming to life.
Yeah, but like we don't really, when you talk in the downtown corridor, right? Like sometimes we don't really do a great job of sort of telling those stories, like the downtown lights, right? And I don't know if you knew this, that they're from San Diego,
Mm-hmm. Wow.
right? Like And they were actually from the Gaslight district in one of the big urban areas in San Diego. And we had come across the deal when they had sort of retrofitted them and had to replace them. Right. So like there's this part in my early part of city council where the staff's got, I'm not like one of those street lights on the table, turning it on going, hey, we found this deal, right? Here's one of the, biggest, most important urban areas in the West Coast. And now we actually have a tie to them, and we've done it probably for 30% the cost that would buying those lights brand new would be. So it's like there's interesting little nuances like that.
Oh, very good. That's knowing the history of those kinds of advancements and improvements is critical for the constituents as well. Now, let's just pivot a little bit. We're not going to talk about Mayor Lundberg other than she's now resigned. She's our former mayor, served the city greatly, total of 20 years as a city councilor and as a mayor. Now that she's resigned, what is your mood? How do you feel like you're prepared, the council's prepared? I know it's subjective, but to engage in these next processes of leading the city through these challenges?
Well, I mean, like the one thing to do is sort of give caveats that we do have, like it's 2020, right? Like I saw a thing yesterday that was, that NASA had a study that there might be an asteroid that hits before the election. And I'm going, 2020, please stop right now.
Yeah.
So there was a story that Christine had shared with me once when she met the mayor from, I think, Hillsborough, and the mayor from Hillsborough had told her once that everybody's a city councilor and there's only one mayor, right? It's the mayor and a member of council. And I think one of the things that happens when you're in city government is the mayor is such an effective public face of the city, right? That you really do forget that person is part of a governing unit that's got, a lot of competent people who put their time, energy, and sweat into running the city. So what I would tell my constituents right now is really the city's in good hands, right? The staff's in good shape. Our new city manager is great. The council is fully up to speed, right? So that it's going to be, we have a big decision coming up about mayor, but like the idea that we're going to, miss a step or that we're, somehow behind just what isn't accurate. Like the city's going to keep running. We're still there.
Yeah, that's good. I really appreciate Nancy Newton, the new city manager. I'll tell you what, she just has this herself has this amazing sense of leadership about herself and a sense of professionalism and a grasp of what's being required. And you're right, Neil Ladotti's still there. The staff is still there. AJ is there. What's the young lady in charge of economic development? Courtney Griesel is there. Just a lot of good, seasoned, steady leadership that has kept the hub of the administration portion of city management moving forward. So I agree with that assessment. That's something that's good for the city. Let's talk about, we'll probably come back to this point, but let's talk about protest. What have you learned as a leader? How has that impacted you? What things are you doing? Maybe something reading or conversations you might be having personally or privately, if you can elaborate on those. How are you growing, and how do you think the city's doing and growing with this new challenges we're facing?
So I think there's a couple levels to this, right? And again, with everything that you're challenged with in 2020, right, it requires you to hold multiple sort of, I guess, truths at the same time in your head and kind of work through, that they're fairly complicated ideas. So when you think about right now, most people want, like, it's a country and land of opportunity, right? Like, and the important thing is that everybody's welcome in this community, right? Like, and without, we're politically diverse, we're ethnically diverse, but we want a community that everybody feels welcome and feels part about, the economic and political freedom and the ability to bring your family over here, raise your family, and have a future in our community. And I think when it comes to when it comes to these types of protests, the thing that I keep trying to do, because sometimes I get a little solution driven, is just stop back and listen, right? And be like, okay, what are people really trying to tell me? You know, have I heard them? Have I seen them? You know, do I really understand with where they're actually coming from? And one of the big things I think in that I've learned about leadership sometimes the hard way is it's really easy to assume people's motives, right? Hey, you're doing this because you're a bad person. And in reality, most people are trying to do the best they can with the information that they've got at the time. Most of the time in these situations, you know, I talk to people, I reach out to people, I talk to people on the phone, and just try to just be open and be there for people to talk about where we're at as a group. But the important thing, I think, is to realize that as a community, right, we need everybody here. And right, like, and when you talk about economic and political freedom, right, like, it's not zero sum, right? When you have more economic freedom, that doesn't mean less economic freedom for me. It's cumulative, right? When the community's better off, we're all better off. And, you know, and I think it's fair and important to say is, with that, you know, I kind of have given you a very, very high level view on it, right? But, you know, this is also a community that supports a police department. This is also a community that has a community standard, right, for behavior, right? So, like, being able to figure out and have those conversations and figure out, well, where do we go from here is really important.
Now, what about we have some, you know, we're facing pandemic.
Yep.
We're facing the economic upheaval at every level.
Yes.
We're looking at the issues mentioned in regards to social unrest, and much of that is race related. What kind of trainings or materials are being digested? Is the city doing any work in this area to try to better understand what's being said behind what's being said?
I don't want to comment about like the staff perspective of it, and counselors respond, I think, individually to be, individually, and it's a really good question to sort of, you know, ask people. I can tell you that, you know, I consume a lot of the, like, you know, material, everything from, you know, a lot of the news about what's going on to, you know, a lot of the interviews that you've put on about protests in general, right? So, like, I think as a society, we're in this place that all of this is putting pressure at the same time, you know, on us as a community, right? And so, like, being able to address all three and possibly four, right, like, you know, becomes really, really important, and then kind of lay out a plan for how do you even have those conversations. I thought one of the things that Christine did really well was bring back this idea of a social compact. That was her blue ribbon committee that she had started, that was in flight. Like, I don't know what the timing and how we pick that up. That really depends on how we choose, whoever's going to be mayor next. But I actually thought that was a really good idea, because it kind of forced us to all sit down and go, how do we want to do this as a community?
Well, I appreciate that. When I asked about maybe some of the things the city has done, maybe it might have been more appropriate to ask Nancy, but I was just wondering if there was resources being offered to all of you as leaders on the city council about some of these things that you could read or listen to, or...
Yeah, and I don't, like, usually I'm picking those resources up from other community leaders. Like, what are they reading? You know what I mean? And, you know, what are they actually looking at? There's not a formal training program that they've offered the rest of the council, if you will.
I know Lane County has instituted, they have some listening sessions, I believe that's what they've called it, that are taking place currently on many different levels to try to make sure. First, let me just say to everyone that hears this, it is very complex, and it is very difficult, and it is almost scary to say the wrong thing or say something and it's misinterpreted, and someone else says, no, this is what he may have said, but the intent is different, but you didn't know how to say it. And I think a lot of people are struggling with that. Obviously, I'm struggling with just trying to express that correctly. And I think that all of us have a lot to learn and how to get better in our conversations, excuse me, and how we can improve that skill set. So this comment really isn't just as towards you, Sean, as is to other people, that we all have to figure how to say these things and give those we're having the conversation with some latitude to fail.
Yeah, and I think that's a relevant observation, right? Like there's a lot of work to do in this area, and it's not going to get solved tomorrow, but we can keep marching down the road, right?
Right. Let's talk about talking with some of the groups that are in opposition one to another. What have I discovered? Well, after speaking with the Black Unity leaders, We the People, some of the Patriots, it's surprising that they're all coming from a value-based belief system that is very real and very credible, but trying to communicate it, hold fast to it, yield this growth, right? No growth without resistance. And how do you feel? Do you have an opinion on how city government might better facilitate some of these really hard conversations?
I think that's the conversation that's going to come out of the Blue Ribbon panel, because we're a politically diverse group, for as far as the city, right? Like there's a lot of conservatives that live in this community. There's progressives or left-wing people, folks, and I think that's the conversation that we're trying to get to. Like, what's the framework that how we're all going to live successfully together and make sure that, we treat each other with, respect and build strong neighborhoods. I don't know what that looks like, but I think that's a conversation that we actually have to have, is because it's gonna allow us to kind of go forward, right? Like, I don't know if you remember, maybe mid-month there was actually a dialogue, a Q&A, that happened between. I thought that was really healthy and really good. But the part I would tell people is it is going to feel uncomfortable, right? Like, it is going to, but we have to figure out how to do it.
It's hard stuff. It's really been on my heart and my mind a lot, because I want peace in the city in which I live. I want peace in the community for the city in which I live. I want peace for my neighbors and the residents. It's already hard enough as with the pandemic and the economic upheaval and all that's created for others. And I'm not saying these other things aren't relevant issues, because they are, but I think it's really important that we find a way to start having these conversations quickly so that we can avoid something dangerous taking place in our midst.
Well, and I would balance that, right? Like, the conversation is like, quickly is not going to get us through this conversation, right? It's not going to be like, let's go having a beer is the start of the conversation. And the reality is, in the city, we have those big challenges that you've outlined, right? But we're a group of 60,000. There's a lot of people that, that have had good news happen to them, right? Like, there's a lot of positive things that still, community groups and churches that still get back together, and people who bring lasagna over to people's doors. So, I think context also matters, right? Because we're seeing these big three things we face as a community, but also remember that we're still a community. Like, we will still figure that, we still have a lot of great things happening to us.
Now, what have you come to understand about the request regarding defund the police? What are some of the logistics being offered about exactly what does that mean? What have you learned about that?
Well, so before we sort of tackle, we started this conversation, saying, where I kind of said like this requires that we hold two things in our heads at the same time. So I'm going to give you guys kind of where I'm at, right? Which is in reality, right? Like doing this together isn't a light switch, right? It's not on, we're pro police, off, we're, or, left or right, right? Like we got to figure out how do we want to be policed in the, in the future. And as a person, as an elected official, you know, I'm, I support our police, right? There's a lot of folks that are doing hard work out there every single day. And while we need to have a conversation about, well, how do we build transparency and trust in the community, right? Like, and do it better. I always remember on the side of the police have committed to excellence, right? And I'm sure you know this from a leadership perspective, right? Like, truly great organizations know that excellence is a thing that you chase,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yes.
And like, and I'm kind of looking forward to the conversation where we all figure out how do we do it together. Now, to the money question, like I know on a sort of a policy level, what folks are arguing is essentially, why don't you take money from police and drive it into social services, right? That's the technical constraint that they're doing. I think it's really tough to paint into your, to paint communities with that big of a broad brush, right? Like without having without, working through the process. Cahoots is funded, we have, 24-hour Cahoots. It's funded out of our police budget right here, right now, right? We have neighborhood conflict resolution services that, get funded out of the police the police budget, right? So to just say, hey, the answer is, just cut, 10% off, I don't think is a productive part of the response. What we have to do is sort of back up, right? Look at the horizon about where we're going and going, okay, how do we, build and open and, just have a great police department? How do we get back to chasing that excellence?
Yeah, the issues around mental health and drug addiction and some of the things that all communities are having to face right now, it is a challenge. And I think that communities have, just by default, have begun to rely on police to do everything. They got to go to the house. Let's just say it's some kind of family dispute, and all of a sudden they're no longer it's not a clear necessary violation of the law, but you have, they're playing, for lack of a different description, a former pastor or something, and okay, now you're a policeman and a pastor and all of these at one time, and now you're trying to figure out what's the best way to employ my skills and my training that aren't necessarily in line with some of these other new requirements that have been placed upon me. I think that's a real part of the conversation, and we need to accept that.
Yeah, and I think if we could shift off of that sort of conversation about sort of defund as a question, like we can get back to, because I don't the conversation about like what's the appropriate level of service. When you talk to the fire folks, when you talk to the police folks, they're all huge fans of Cahoots. Every time we talk about Cahoots as a city, right, they're saying that that's really, taking these, non-appropriate calls for, either police or fire and driving them in a place that makes a whole lot more sense. Mm-hmm. So like, we've got to be willing to sort of adjust what we're doing to make sure that we get the right services out there for folks.
Yeah, that's really big, long, hard conversations trying to narrow that in and narrow that down, and realizing that not everyone is going to like every aspect of the final decisions. And I appreciate, when I was in the Army, in my leadership development, they used to tell us all the time, make a decision. Period. Make a decision, and when 50% of the people like it and 50% of the people hate it, you've made a good, balanced decision. That's how they educated us about that.
Yeah, but I think it also requires, right? Like, we've all been down the Christmas parade when, the cops have handed out the badges, and I think they deputized half the kids in Springfield, right? Like, it also means that there are real things that I hear from activists in the community that are like, okay, those are real questions we should get answered, right? Like, we need a better complaint process, right? We need to answer, be more clear. There's a thing out there called eight can't wait. I'm sure we do three of them. Three of them we've looked at, and maybe two more, for some reason, aren't good ideas, right? We've got to get better at answering those types of questions as well, and also lay out a plan for how we're going to discuss some of these issues at council. Like, it's not one side or the other. It's how do you actually work your way through these real problems and get to the other side of it.
So there's some. I appreciate when we started this. You welcome some tough questions. I do have a couple of tough questions as we talk about this. I think they're reasonable. No one has the answers to all of the things that we're hemorrhaging. We're hemorrhaging, and I think we have to be sensitive as residents, community members, to that we're all hemorrhaging together. Now, regarding communication, now before Mayor Lundberg left, she sent out a really nice letter, I thought, to the community.
Right.
Do you see any other of those types of actions taking place so that the people have a sense that leadership is thinking about this, leadership is taking action? Because one of the questions that came in regarding the Black unity lead to the comments that it's like the city is just waiting for all this to go away. They don't want to deal with it. They don't know how to deal with it. They just want it to go away. What's your response to that?
I think at a leadership level, right? Like, you have to be flexible, especially in such trying times, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you have to sort of be, I guess that's where the real resilience comes in, right? Is sort of be adaptable to kind of work your way through this, right? And the reality is it's 2020, right? We've had a long list of societal changes and economic changes and how we communicate. I don't know what the form is, right? But I understand that there's more of a desire to kind of understand the thinking and thought process behind how the actual sausage is made at council, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think we've got to just figure out what does that actually look like. I know there's more interest out there. It's not like, we meet regularly scheduled, it's transparent, it's out in the open, and we've got to sort of figure out, okay, all right, like, how do you share some of that thinking a little bit more with folks so that they understand that when people are talking to you, we are sort of listening and thinking about it. One of the things I often hear is, hey, I wrote city council and I didn't get a response back, right? Sometimes, sometimes that is true, right? Like, but I can tell you that me and most of my colleagues, we read every email that we get. We're not just flat out ignoring people. Or people talk about, like, you talk at council and then nothing happens, and then suddenly a lot of things happen, right? So it's just, I think we've got to just, I guess, be more adaptable and kind of meet people where they're at so that they can see that how they're interfacing with city council is the way you're supposed to, and all that input's being taken into consideration as we figure out how to serve the public best.
Mm-hmm.
But I understand where the critique comes from.
So there's also speculation that it's been decided who's going to be the next mayor. There's speculation that you personally have already been selected. That there's speculation that when Mayor Lundberg ran, that she was going to step down in a couple of years and you were going to be the next mayor. You want to speak to that at all? I think, and I bring this up, Sean, because I think it's important that if that happens,
mm-hmm.
if that's the end result, the people know that everything that was done, number one, that it's going to be transparent, but number two, that it's done in good faith and that they can trust you as the next mayor of Springfield, if that is indeed the end result.
Yeah, and I can tell you, right, like, so let's take maybe I can tell you nothing's been decided because we haven't met, right? So like whatever the process that we follow on decide on the 8th is going to be like that will be the process, right? And then we will be able to see and share and talk about that from a city council, like from a city council perspective. I always think it's interesting because people watch and see, and it seems so normal to us. And I go, okay, wait a minute, maybe we have to come back and talk about what's actually happening. All the discussion is going to happen in public, and it's going to be transparent because we're going to basically say what process in our thinking is that is going to be that we're going to follow. So that should help, right? Because then it's going to take a couple of weeks. I do have an interest in being mayor. I will express that to my colleagues, but I also understand that we're at a sort of precarious position. It says that, it kind of reminds me of, it really is an appointment, right? Going through those first 2 years, like when I went on city council, I really had to sort of be aware that to carry the public's will takes a little bit of extra work and effort to make sure that you're moving along, because you don't have an election that really backs you up. The other thing I would tell you is that when we think about, and then I'll see if you have any more questions about it, when we think about the recent election, the election does tell us something, right? Mm-hmm. It does tell us that the city at a neighborhood level and a people level, like, people are happy with the direction that we're going, right? So we can, like, when I think about how to exercise my role as a city councilor, what I'm going to look for is sort of the experience to address those 3 big areas that we talked about, but also an understanding that people did vote for what Christine's sort of platform was, mm-hmm. And the general direction of the city. And so I think that plays a role into it. But I think there's quite a few layers to this.
Yeah, your explanation is really helpful. For me, I was very clear. I sent all of you an email in the interest of full disclosure that I definitely wanted. I didn't really know what the city charter said, so right. What I was responding to was probably a little bit more emotional than it was informed. But now knowing what the city charter says, for me, the biggest thing is it's transparent. I want to know that whoever is going to be the next mayor, whether it's you or someone else, that they go through the process of being heard. I would prefer to see a free election because I'm a voter, and I want to vote for who is going to be my elected official, so to speak. That's a philosophical perspective.
Sure.
But that notwithstanding, I understand what you're saying too in this very moment, that there was a clear message sent by the supporters for Christine, and that there is some legitimacy to that platform and some legitimacy to that direction. And I really believe that people will be, obviously I understand there's other people asking for different people to be appointed. They want people to be appointed that cannot carry the power of the incumbency, that you're appointed for 2 years with the knowledge of you cannot run. I know they did that with the city manager in years past. Mike Harmon from the police department, he was a interim city manager, understanding that he could not apply to be the next city manager. And so there's some consideration out there. There's a platform for that. And I think the heart of what is being said is, even for me, I'm kind of emotional about it. I mean, I want to make sure that because we have the pandemic, because we have the emotional, the economic upheaval, because we have all these social issues, right now, more for me as a resident, as a participant in the community, I want to know that the next person coming up is indeed aware and is indeed concerned and is indeed going to effectively make themselves available to the people to start addressing some of these things.
Yeah, and I think you bring up valid points, right? Those are real feelings out there. What I often tell people is, right, like, some of this is sort of political philosophy, right? Like, so, we're going to have, like, yes, whatever the appointment happens, it's going to go until December, it's going to go until 2022. But we're really at the extreme end of what the charter sort of allows. Really, you're talking about by January of 2022, we're going to be in full-blown election. So it's not really 2 years. It's really more like 12, maybe 18 months before the next election. So I don't know that helps, but like, I also think that when you think about, like, I've heard this rule about, oh, look, do a placeholder or some version of that. Look, I'm looking regardless of what I want to do for the best person for Springfield. I think it would be silly to put that constraint on them. If they're the best person, right? Like, let's go find the best person for Springfield, and trust that the voters, right, in a democracy are the final arbitrators of that. They're the people that get to decide in the end. It's going to be 2022, but if we made the right choice, then let them make the right choice.
No, that's an equally admirable position, and one that needs to be considered for sure, Sean. It's important that I think with everything that's going on, people just want to be heard. And they just want to make sure that what they're saying means something to the people in charge, that their perspective, as well as their pain, this apprehension, that it is legitimized with respect to, I do hear you, and we are entering this process to do something reasonable and discernible, and in some cases maybe even formidable, to solve some of these greater social questions that we have.
Yeah, and I think that's the big, and regardless if we were outside of a pandemic, right? That's the lesson about being on city boards and city commissions and on city council that it teaches you. I know you're running for sub board, and I think the same rule applies. Like, I always open the budget and there's an org chart, right? And there's 60,000 people that are above my head and my colleague's head as far as the people that we serve, right? And like, maybe people sometimes don't feel like we explain what we're doing right, but I can tell you that elected boards show up trying to serve the public's will as best that they can in any given moment.
No, and I would agree with you there. I've served on the budget committee for the city in the past, and police planning task force, and I've served on a host of other different boards here down in Texas, and it's a lot of hard work. And I think for those that definitely want to have an impact in what policies are established and made here in the city, they also have to get involved with the civic process and start serving on some of these boards to begin to understand what is the makeup.
Yeah, and I will let a couple of secrets out. Don't tell anybody. Just us two talking. Specifically to the mayor's appointment, the FAQs the city published are all the information. They're all the information that I have at this point until the 8th. The other portion is that there's oftentimes a big invitation to kind of come into City Hall. We are. In September, we're going to launch into a big recruitment process to fill all of our committees going over into the next year. And and that's really the process where political power grows, or leaders are really built from a city perspective. And then I would offer that the city does run a program for leaders called CityLink that you can sign up for. And I don't remember if it's 12 weeks or more than that off of the top of my head, but that was really a response out of the ICE contract when the council said, we want to do more. Well, that would be the type of training and experience and information that I would get on my first day as city councilor. I saw part of it and I was like, man, if I walked into the door wanting to understand the city, right, I wish I could have started here, right? So there's a lot of work that sort of is being done to try to make sure that, that more facts and more of the story of the city and how people can participate gets out there.
And what was that called again, Sean? CityLink?
Yep. CityLink. Invite Neil on to talk about it. He designed the entire program.
I'll do that. I've been wanting to interview him for some time, but I know there's so much going on at the city. I didn't want to really, I was concerned about being too much of a distraction at that point.
Now they will fit you in at some point.
Yeah. What would you like to say to those that are concerned, nervous, questioning either motives, or maybe they don't understand the process, or I know there's legal precedents for appointment of a city councilor, there's all of that, but let's just say that I believe you when you say there's going to be a process and it's going to be transparent. If I didn't believe that at the end of this conversation, I would be asking you a lot of different kinds of questions, but I believe you. So
Right.
I'm choosing to accept what you're saying as legitimate, and that we will see with our own eyes that what you said today was true, because you've said it on those that are watching it. Here it is, right? It's not going to be edited out. What would you say to those that are very concerned about this process, the residents, other people that are watching your commitment to ensure that the people are being heard?
Um, I think as a society, right? This isn't a Springfield piece, that we are in a low trust moment, right? Like, we don't trust organizations, we don't trust governments. You could argue that in some cases churches aren't doing well or corporations aren't doing well. I would ask them to stick in there with us, right? We're a community of choice. People chose to live in Springfield, right? So as we work through this and wherever it ends up, and I understand not everybody's going to be perfectly happy with wherever it ends up, that they just keep showing up, right? Like the way to rebuild sort of trust in I think communities or in societies is just to keep having conversations, ask the questions, email your city councilors, right? Call me and I'll talk to people about it. But I think having conversations to kind of go, okay, when I see this piece of information and maybe it makes me uncomfortable or I don't understand why that is the case, if somebody's there to sort of either help you zoom in, give you context, take a step back so you can see what's actually happening, I think that helps. But like, I empathize, right? Like, I understand that there's a lot of people that in 2020 are carrying a huge burden, and a lot of it's not anybody's fault. And that's not a Springfield politics thing. When people are in the middle of sort of worried about how they're going to pay their rent and, how to get the kids to school, right? It's a huge burden that a lot of people are carrying.
Yeah, school is supposed to start next week, and everything is dramatically different for all of us still. And that is, I believe, an additional significant stressor for everyone. One final subject area I'd like to discuss with you, or have you discuss with the people, is regarding the ICE contracts. Now, you were a pivotal leader in hosting the necessary conversations to reverse that decision. What did you learn about why it was important to really take this head on and to take this to the council, to hear the people, and take this to the council and say, we have a problem here and we need to fix this?
I think in my head, right, how I approach things is sometimes I don't know if you want to call it a moderate or a solutions-based person, right? So in my head, I kind of had approached it as, hey, look, how do I actually, adjust the things that we don't like, right, to get it to a place that we do? And I remember walking through and kind of thinking about, most of the time in big moments of national crisis in Springfield, either us as a community, us as a council tend to sort of zoom and say, okay, that over there is the national conversation, right? And this over here is our conversation, and we can talk about what the community does. And one of the things that was a big experience, an experience for me when I realized that we couldn't do that, right? Like, this was such a big moment that we couldn't disconnect those two things. And I was really, I had a ton of conversations that weekend with people, right? And really just kind of had thought about it. And at the end of the day, I kind of thought, what do I really want out of this for the community, right? And I wanted people to feel safe calling the police. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of how I kind of reached that conclusion that said, my goal isn't necessarily protecting a nice contract. My goal was public safety, and what the best way to do and get people to be willing to call the police and report crimes so that we can keep our families and neighborhoods safe was getting rid of the contract at that time. But like out of that came a ton of good relationships. Johannes and I don't agree on everything, right? But he calls me on a regular basis now. And that's a product of being able to create those, create those relationships in that moment that provide benefits long term.
Now, I'm a board member on the Springfield Area Chamber of Commerce, and I have just grown tremendously fond of Vonnie Mickelson's leadership. And she is one of them. When I was in Germany, one of my U.S. Army Europe commander was Colin Powell. And when President Reagan tapped him for the Joint Chiefs of Staff at that time, he came to every unit to say goodbye. And he was a lieutenant general or a 3-star general at that time. And I just remember being so enamored with his leadership, his command presence that he had. He was so dignified. And I always tell Vonnie she reminds me of a feel-great officer in the military with her deliberate leadership, intentional leadership. We have a lot of Hispanic-owned or Latinx-owned businesses all up and down Main Street, all the way down out to Thurston. If you're appointed mayor, what might you do with Vonnie Mickelson and the Chamber Board to help bridge more of a participation, or maybe I should say communication, of economic capacity and economic development between those two segments of the community?
So, Vonnie's great. I actually think she's one of the most forward-thinking, probably creative, inspirational leaders that we have in town. I think the Chamber's in really good hands, and the work the Chamber's done probably the last 5 years has been fantastic. And I actually think that from a business advocacy perspective and trying to do the hard work to think through problems that we see from an economic development perspective, I think the Chamber's been spot on. And then I think to your other question is, right, like we want, businesses should be a part of the Chamber, right? If there's not, there's an advocacy and support organization that helps both from a business side, from how do you learn how to run your business, to just simply an advocacy and an educational side, it's the Chamber, right? And I think your question is well, how do you outreach to Latinx businesses? And I think I'm going to cut a part of it, and it's regardless, the mayor question doesn't matter to that point, right? I'm willing to go talk to, and talk and support the Chamber and talk to Latinx businesses regardless of what happens to that. Because I think bringing more economic potential to, out in the city is a good thing. And it creates opportunities for everybody, and that's the way we move forward here. It's, if it's a networking organization that maybe I don't know about, or if it's, just simply talk to people as, you run into them. That's what being, I think, a good elected official is about.
Well, no, I agree with you. I just think it's important that, and Vonnie does, and the board, they do a great job. The staff at the Chamber does a great job. And there's been a lot of energy around including all businesses and making those commitments. I just see that, though, as moving forward with some of the questions about, do people belong, that I would like to see whoever's on city council or the next mayor get out and start meeting some of these Latinx-owned businesses and make some connections. I believe that they have a place here and that they're prospering and that they're doing well, because they're as legitimate a business community as the rest of the business community. And I think that sometimes people need to know that they are invited to the table in case they feel like they're not invited to the table.
They are invited to the table, right? And that's the message I think we have to keep coming through, right? I talked about boards and commissions and all that kind of stuff. Economically, everybody who runs a business, and owning a business is hard.
Mm-hmm.
It is hard work. everybody in this community belongs. And one thing I would say is in the pandemic, right? Like I've been really amazed when the state has been clear about what the rules have been. Businesses are out there, like if you want to pick up your food at the, doorstep, they need it delivered, right? They need, I had Evie from La Granada bring out food to our whole neighborhood one time. Businesses are hardwired to figure this out.
Mm-hmm.
People do a great job.
No, that's right. I'm always repeating this one line or stressing this one reality that in Springfield we might have 5 or 6 CEOs of fairly large organizations, but we have 500 or 600 small business owners who keep our economy running. And I mean, we need both. Let me be clear about that. But I think we need to give as much credence and credibility to the small business owner because they're slugging it in and day out.
Absolutely.
Yep. So, in closing, Sean, first of all, I just really appreciate your transparency today, and I appreciate your thoughtfulness and your responses and making yourself available. You're on a full wave radio length to every constituent in Springfield. You have a moment in time to speak to everyone in the sound of your voice. What would you say to them?
Well, I would tell them that we'll get through this. And the reasons that they chose Springfield are still all true, right? Like sometimes it's that smile, right? Like sometimes it's, the opportunity that it creates for yourself, but like people choose to live here. And I recognize that. And I think that the hardship that people feel, right? Like there's a lot of work ahead of us and a lot of pain ahead of us, but we're going to get to the other side of it. And it's going to we'll just continue on.
If you're appointed mayor of Springfield, are you fully prepared to engage every resident and the issues? Are you prepared to expose yourself, not in a negative legal way, but to the different people groups or organizations that have something that they need to say so that they want to know that they're heard? Are you prepared, if you're appointed mayor, or even if you're not appointed mayor, just moving into this next season of leadership in your life as you continue to help lead the city, are you prepared to sit down and have conversations with folks?
I have a lot of conversations with folks now. Sometimes it takes a little while to set it up. Sometimes, I've thought about better ways to do it. But like, if people want to have a cup of coffee, I don't particularly like coffee. I actually like Diet Dr. Pepper, but usually people forgive me for that part. I'm willing to sit down and talk to folks.
All right, very good. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, we've had with us today Sean VanGordon, City Councilor for Ward 1, the Gateway area of Springfield, Oregon. Sean, thank you. Thank you for your time and the sacrifice of your time. Thank you for making yourself available and being willing to answer the questions as they came up in conversation. I hope you get on this recess time a break with your family and gather your strength. I know that the City Council has some hard decisions ahead of them, but I know that you guys will follow the process. I trust Nancy Newton. I trust the city staff to help guide you in that process, and I believe that the selection of the next mayor, I'm taking you at your word and endorsing that it will be a transparent process and the citizens will have a right to have their say and to be involved. But in the end, I also believe that you're going to have to make the decision that's best for the city overall. So that notwithstanding, thank you, sir. Have a very good evening, and we'll hope to have a greater conversation with you in the near future.
I appreciate it. Take care.
Yes, sir.